My beautiful niece has this way of talking that I call Gen Z understatement. Perhaps it reflects a certain humility or a kind of jadedness that might be a poignant outcome of the times we are in. Like, let's not get too extra about anything. Anyway, when something amazing happens, she'll send me a picture of it and say, "So this happened." When she's created something, say a really fancy dish or a scarf, she might say, "I did a thing," next to the picture. And let's say someone she really doesn't like ends up getting in hot water. She'll say, "Remember that guy I told you about? Well, he's going to go through some things." And I thought of that this week because whether it's the people of Judah or the followers of Jesus, then and now, we all sometimes need to face that. We're going to go through some things. Now, the prophet Jeremiah, as you know, was not much for Gen Z understatement. He, like the other prophets, tends to pivot between "you're toast, you're golden, you're toast, you're golden." Jeremiah has spent the previous chapters describing with high urgency and considerable detail how the Judeans are toast. They are going to be sent away from Judah and into exile in Babylon. The temple in Jerusalem, the very house of God, has been looted and sacked and desecrated, and there is no promise it will be rebuilt, Jeremiah has said. Get packing. It's time to say goodbye to Jerusalem, to Judah, because you're going to go through some things. That's what God told me to tell you. And then we have Jesus. He's been hinting that things are going to get rough for a while, that he's going to die. And this is, of course, not what the disciples want to hear. As they see it, God has sent this prophet. They're beginning to believe he is the promised Messiah, the one sent to save them. And they consider themselves his followers. So now he's saying he's leaving them, that he's going to go through some things, which means, well, what? What does it mean for them? In the midst of their denial and anticipatory grief, beset by confusion and fear and doubt, all they see is winter. How can this be God's plan? They can't see in that tunnel ahead that looks only like darkness that there is a light, and if they follow the light, they will understand that the only way out is going through the things. That God was never not with them and will never not be with them. But of course winter is all they see. Of course all they see is loss and death. Of course they feel abandoned. For this is the pattern of God's people, of knowing God to be with them and then wondering where God went. A pattern of wandering, forgetting God, and then feeling the consequences of their separation as bitter punishment, a great loss or a displacement, a time of suffering, but then always God's promise of self-revelation in a new way and a new beginning. Jeremiah spoke into a time that was akin to a Holocaust for his people. This new covenant then was about radical renewal and restoration. It was the beginning of the idea of a God within and among the people. This was an indwelling God, not a God up there so much as a God in here. This is not a God that we know things about, but a God whom we know in our hearts. They will not need to teach one another, for they will know me, God says. The Hebrew word knowing here is the same as the one in Genesis, where Adam knew Eve. It is intimate knowing, a deep unity with God, a mystical union, a oneness. That's the kind of knowing that hundreds of years later, Jesus's followers are struggling to grasp, for they knew Jesus as a human. Likewise, when the Greeks, the Gentiles, come and say, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus," they meant, we want to meet this Jesus guy. We want to hear what he has to say too. How could they have prepared for what he told them? For Jesus was not going to meet them on their terms, although he doesn't dismiss them either. Essentially, he tells them, if you want to see me, first of all, I don't have time because I need to go through some things like now, but that's okay because it's not about me. That is, it's not about the me that you think you want to see. Second, be careful what you wish for when you say you want to see me, because my hour is come and the things I need to go through are not going to be easy to bear. What you see is going to open your eyes and unstop your ears. So if you really want to see me, you're going to have to bear it too. And that means that you too will need to go through some things. But then you'll really see me. Well, that's a pretty big thing to take in. And some scholars think Jesus himself came to understand this only gradually. We have an idea where Jesus is going. We know what happens on the other side of the crucifixion, but even we struggle to explain it. We can't expect the disciples to understand it, let alone those Gentiles. Of the four evangelists, and Paul too for that matter, John is the one who challenges us to see the crucifixion as a triumph, not as a tragedy. John is the one who sees Jesus' incarnation as 33 short years, somewhere between creation itself and eternity. So the crucifixion is for him the specific location of the breakthrough that God needed to happen. The moment of victory, where those important people who rejected Jesus and the occupying Romans who pulled out the stops to ensure that he came to a violent end will be thwarted. And Jesus will defeat death, and his tiny band of not very important people by the world standards will multiply into billions of souls and change the world. The cross is the crux. The crux is the cross. The only way to come into Christ is through the cross. But that was and is hard to explain. So Jesus uses this beautiful metaphor of the grain of wheat. A more literal translation of what he says is, if a grain of wheat that has fallen into the ground does not die, it remains alone. But if it does die, it bears much fruit. Oscar Romero, the Catholic bishop and martyr of El Salvador, was said to have taken great comfort from this verse when his own life was threatened. And indeed, his story and example have only grown in impact and significance since he was assassinated. I think Jesus means that his death will glorify God by bringing God glory here on earth because of the fruit that will be born of it. And so it has. Every act of Jesus' incarnation had purpose, including his birth, including his suffering, including his death on the cross. The creator of all things wants to etch something onto our hearts, a covenantal instinct, a new thing, a language of faith, a way of knowing who and whose we really are. All that is asked of us is that we make our hearts fertile ground for it, to receive Christ into us, not just in word and in teaching, but even into our DNA, to know Christ so that we may be Christ to others, to seek and serve the Christ in all persons, as our baptismal vows say. We, my friends, are the fruit. We live out the purpose of his wrenching death on the cross. God is revealing this to us right now in the created world on this first day of spring. If there is anything that the cross teaches us, it is that just as winter gives way to spring, from death comes resurrection. If there is anything the cross teaches us, it is that God is not only waiting for us, but that God is with us when we go through things. So what needs to die in us? What needs to fall to the ground and be buried like that grain of wheat to bear fruit in us for the sake of others? It's time to say goodbye to those wants, desires, expectations, or assumptions so that we too can sow seeds. Seeds of forgiveness, of hospitality, of inclusion, of community, of hope, of justice. So as we continue on our solemn Lenten journey and we draw ever closer to the cross, remember that the green blade riseth. Remember, as our beloved hymn says, when our hearts are wintry, grieving, or in pain, then your touch can call us back to life again. Fields of our hearts that dead and bare have been, soon love will come again, like wheat that springs up green. Amen.